When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. Oh, the men will cheer, the boys will shout, the ladies they will all turn out, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. And we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. Get ready for the Jubilee, hurrah, hurrah. We'll give the hero 3 times 3, hurrah, hurrah. Oh, the war breeze is ready now to place upon his loyal brow, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. And we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home.
My love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me irresistibly on with all these chains to the battlefield. July 14th, 1861.
The last words written by Major Sullivan Ballou could describe the sentiments of many Americans who joined the ranks during the Civil War of 1861 to 1865. Approximately 2.75 million men enlisted, with nearly 620,000 making the ultimate sacrifice. However, amongst the ranks, some men weren't. It is estimated that 400 women joined the ranks as foot soldiers and officers alike, and were cleverly disguised so that the untrained eye would know none the wiser. Like North versus South, countrymen against countrymen, this was the duality of women at war. Women played a major role in the war efforts for both the Union North and the Confederate South. Nursing was a sector that many women found themselves part of. Famous nurses such as Dorothy Dix and Clara Barton were among many that volunteered over the course of the war. By participating in this way, women treating the wounded were forced to witness the true horrors of battle. Many women associated with the Army were nurses, some of whom were also doctors and surgeons. Among their ranks was Dr. Mary Walker, who worked as a surgeon with the Union Army and was the first woman to ever do so. She was later captured by the Confederate Army and was eventually awarded a Medal of Honor. Outside of the medical field, women had impacts on the war in many other ways. The Sanitary Commission was established to maintain a certain level of comfort for hospitalized soldiers. Women would have positions in camp to cook, clean, and do laundry. Even on the home front, efforts to boost morale for both men and the cause was undertaken by women everywhere. However, for the time being, the focus is on those who adopted a different identity with their dear aliases and joined the Army instead. I think we have enough rations left to make a loaf of cornbread.
Do we have some pork?
I'm not aware, but we do have potatoes in store.
Good Lord. Certain realities of wartime society created advantages that concealed a woman's identity. The 1860s saw industries evolve to better suit this new and changing landscape of war. The first instance of mass-market clothing were starting to rise, predominantly with the manufacturing of military uniforms. Coats were either too tight or too loose, as the luxuries of tailor-made clothing weren't available to the majority of soldiers. Loose clothing made it easy to conceal the female figure. Each soldier was issued a trimmed hat, a forage cap, a uniform and sack coat, trousers, flannel drawers, bootees, stockings, a leather stock, a greatcoat and stable frock, fatigue overalls, and a blanket for each year that they were in the army. The most requested item actually being knit socks. Daily life for a soldier consisted of harsh drill practice, minimal food rations, ill-fitting clothing, inclement weather, and the anxiety of war. Despite the changes in lifestyle from civilian to soldier, concepts of modesty and hygiene still remained. Sleeping fully clothed and bathing in undergarments was still incredibly common. Soldiers often sought nearby woods and freshwater streams for personal business, which made those disguised have an easier time of going unnoticed. At the beginning of the war, medical exams mostly consisted of answering a few questions. If you were at least 18 years of age and could demonstrate how to march, you were given a uniform. The process was conducted quickly to comply with Lincoln's call for 75,000 volunteers. Even the minimum height requirement was reduced to allow more people to enlist. In most instances, the reason that women were discovered was commonly due to illness or injury. Disease was incredibly dangerous, and in many cases, far more deadly than bullets. If this was the case, many women would simply be sent home. Not much is known about Frances Clayton and her detailed involvement with the war. Historians agree that she enlisted with her husband in 1861 in a Union regiment based in Missouri with the name of Jack Williams. She had an easy time fitting in. Clayton perfected her skills in swearing, gambling, chewing tobacco, drinking, and smoking. Her physique was naturally tall and thin, and according to her superiors, was a model for others. She was well-trained, well-respected, and reliable. She fought alongside her husband, and when he was killed in 1862 at the Battle of Stones River, the story is that she stepped over his body, fixed bayonets, and charged with the rest of the men. Most of the information on Clayton is from multiple newspaper accounts, many of which muddle the details of her career, but what remains certain is that she was there and fighting in full force. Jenny Hodgers is a different case from the others, in the sense that after the course of the war, Hodgers continued to live the rest of their life under the male alias of Albert Cashier. In 1862, she enlisted with the 95th Illinois Infantry. Despite being the shortest member, Cashier was accepted as one of the men, and generally regarded as a good and capable soldier. The 95th saw action in over 40 events over the course of the war. Cashier served the full 3-year enlistment until the regiment was mustered out in 1865, with the lives of 289 soldiers lost to death and disease under its belt. After the war, Cashier held the positions of being a farmhand, church janitor, cemetery worker, and a street lamplighter, and even voted in elections and collected veterans' pension. The discovery of Cashier's identity was in 1910, in a car accident that resulted in a broken leg. The local hospital that was in charge of recovery made the realization and actually agreed to keep the secret. Cashier was sent to the Soldiers and Sailors Home in Quincy, Illinois for long-term recovery, and remained a resident there due to the onset of dementia. The dementia ended up causing a transfer to a state hospital for the insane, where attendants discovered their identity and forced them to wear a dress. News outlets heard of the story and made it public. Former regimental members who heard of the story were initially surprised but showed their support and spoke out against the treatment being given at the hospital. When Cashier died in 1915, they were buried in full uniform and given a headstone with the inscription of military service and male name. Letters written home from Sarah Wakeman to her family gave a hint as to what life was like behind the disguise. Her family knew about her life as a soldier and neither supported it nor shunned it, but rather came to accept it as what it was. Wakeman was the eldest of 9 siblings. Records don't state what her motivations were, but most likely they were related to finances. It wasn't likely she was going to marry. It seemed that her family was in debt, and what meager domestic income she was making wasn't nearly enough to support them. At first, she signed on to do manual labor in the Chenango Canal as a boatman under the name of Lyons Wakeman. She ended up enlisting with the 153rd New York Infantry Regiment. In one of her letters home, she said that,
"I have enjoyed myself the best since I have been gone away from home than I ever did before in my life."
The soldier life suited her, and she felt that she was good at it. Come 1864, her regiment was sent to Louisiana. Many of her comrades fell ill and died due to the poor marching conditions in the humid, swampy landscape, but Wakeman marched on. Wakeman and the regiment saw action at Pleasant Hill and Monnett's Bluff, where they beat back the Confederates twice before reaching safety in Alexandria, Louisiana. Shortly afterwards in the same year, Wakeman contracted a chronic illness and died due to the disease. She was buried in New Orleans under the name of Private Lyons Wakeman at Chalmette National Cemetery.
I don't know how long before I shall have to go into the field of battle. For my part, I don't care. I don't feel afraid to go.
Loretta Velasquez was born in Cuba to an upper-class family and started on her eventual path to soldiering when she eloped at 14 and married an officer in the Texas Army. Texas joined the Confederacy, and because of this, her husband was called into action in the Confederate Army. She made up her mind that she wanted to go with him on the front lines, and naturally he disallowed it. But she had a uniform made and took fate into her own hands under the name of Harry T. Buford. She wore facial hair, smoked cigars, and padded her uniform for musculature. With her self-title of lieutenant, she raised a volunteer force in Arkansas and brought the regiment to Florida, where her husband was posted. No known record exists of his reaction when she presented herself as the regiment's commanding officer, and he unfortunately passed some days later in a shooting. She remained active in the war and tried her hand at espionage. She was caught and arrested in New Orleans and accused of being a Union spy. However, the charges were dropped and she was instead fined for impersonating a man. After this altercation, she ended up returning to her regiment and saw battle at Shiloh. This battle was significant because she was wounded by an exploding shell, and her true identity was discovered by a doctor treating the wound. She ended her soldiering at this point and continued on with her life. She had a son, and to support her child, she decided to publish her memoirs and her experiences. It received intense criticism, one Confederate officer claiming the whole thing was pure fiction. While in truth, she may have exaggerated parts of it, she still participated as a lieutenant, and her participation counts. She addressed this allegation of fiction by saying she would hope to be judged with impartiality and her actions aligned with what she thought was right. Kathy Williams is an exceptional example for Civil War women. Born to an enslaved mother and free father, Williams worked as a housemaid on a plantation near Jefferson, Missouri. In 1861, Jefferson was captured by Union forces, and all enslaved people were forced into military support services as cooks, laundresses, and nurses. Williams served as a cook and laundress before her volunteer enlistment at the age of 17. She enlisted under the name of William Cathy with the 38th U.S. Infantry Regiment. During her time in the Army, she was frequently hospitalized and was eventually discovered by a surgeon who then went to inform the commander of Williams' identity. She was honorably discharged by Captain Charles E. Clark. Her discharge meant that her time with the Army was over, but she continued on her path and signed up with the emerging all-black regiment that would come to be known as the Buffalo Soldiers. Kathy Williams was the first African-American woman to enlist, and the only one to be documented to serve in the U.S. Army in the 19th century. She was the only known female Buffalo Soldier. Clara Barton was a nurse during the Civil War and eventually went on to found the American Red Cross. She herself also had a moment of discovery when presented with the case of Mary Galloway. Galloway received a chest wound during the battle and was being treated by Barton, who agreed to conceal her identity. She made a full recovery and was sent home for further recuperation. Barton noted that after Galloway reunited with her husband, the two had a daughter they named after her. Galloway was one of 8 documented female soldiers at the Battle of Antietam. As for Barton, her work was substantial during the war. At the Battle of Antietam, for instance, she brought supplies in 3 army wagons to help the surgeons who were trying to make bandages with corn husks. She also had some interesting theories about women soldiers. Barton argued that over the course of the 4-year Civil War, the efforts exerted by women advanced the female position in society by 50 years. By the same token, a manifesto titled The History of Women's Suffrage, published in 1881, made note that frontline services undertaken by women should account for the same merit and rights as services undertaken by men in the same position. Sarah Emma Edmonds is among one of the most documented Civil War women soldiers. Hailing from New Brunswick, she left home to escape an arranged marriage and an abusive father, and turned to her alias of Frank Thompson. She settled in Michigan, and with the outbreak of the war enlisted in Company F of the 2nd Michigan Infantry. Throughout the course of the war, she served as a soldier, spy, nurse, dispatch rider, and postmaster. In 1863, due to illness and not wanting to be discovered, she left to be treated at a distant hospital. Upon her return, she was shocked that Frank Thompson was marked as a deserter. This notion didn't bode well with her, and after the war, throughout the help of a wartime friend and multiple correspondences, she managed to be awarded with honorable discharge. At the Battle of Antietam, Thompson encountered a fatally wounded comrade on the field. Having been trained as a nurse, she came to his aid. The youth confessed their identity as being female, and for a brief moment, the two confided in each other moments before death. In her memoirs, Sarah Edmonds recounted the story with a poem.
Her race is run. In southern clime, she rests among the brave, where perfumed blossoms gently fall, like tears around her grave. No loving friends are near to weep, or plant bright flowers there, but herdlings chant a requiem sweet, and strangers breathe a prayer. She sleeps in peace, yes, sweetly sleeps. Her sorrows are all o'er. With her the storms of life are past. She's found the heavenly shore.
So why did they do it? Women fought for the same reason men did. Because of circumstance, because of patriotism, for the cause. Good pay, honorable work, a sense of duty, and of course, for some, to escape the bonds of domesticity. Certain records indicate that many of these women were new immigrants, from farming families and lower-class populations. This mirrors the general demographic of male enlistees as well. Historian Elizabeth Leonard theorized that for these women, the motivation to enlist may have been for financial gain. These women would have been accustomed to labor and hard work, whereas their counterparts in more wealthy spheres would, on average, join as nurses. If they were discovered, they were normally discharged and sent home. In most scenarios, their stories and sacrifice were forgotten, and instead they were labeled as women with questionable moral views and sensationalized for their peculiarities of dress. 100 of these cases were documented, but estimates place this phenomena between 400 and 750 individual cases over the course of the war. Their stories are all unique and show strength of character that represented how capable women could be despite it all. They have a place in our books, just like any man and any hero.
In 1861, hurrah, hurrah, that was when the war begun, hurrah, hurrah. In 1862, both sides were falling to, and we'll all drink stone wine when Johnny comes marching home. And we'll all drink stone wine when Johnny comes marching home. In 1863, hurrah, hurrah, old Abe ended slavery, hurrah, hurrah. In 1863, old Abe ended slavery, and we'll all drink stone wine when Johnny comes marching home. And we'll all drink stone